Okay, can everybody hear me well? At the end, you guys good? Can you hear me well?
What did you say?
Can you ask him out, please? Can everybody read this as well? Is that okay? Yeah, brilliant. So my name is Voy. Like Maria mentioned in the short introduction, I've been here for the last few months. I participate in those events quite often. And when Maria and Miriam mentioned that you can talk to people about something interesting, I instantly knew what I want to talk about. This is a subject that I'm very interested in, and I think it's really worth spreading, almost like a TED Talk, an idea worth spreading. So we're going to start today by this little quote that I hope everybody got a chance to read already. We are at the edge of change comparable to the rise of human life on Earth. Okay? Just keep that quote in mind as we're going through this presentation. So I'm going to start by asking you a question. Can I ask you to raise your hand? And the question is, who here is at least remotely concerned about death, about dying? Who has thought about it? Who has any worrying thoughts about forever diminishing into nothingness? Okay, quite a few of us, not all of us. That's interesting. Some of us don't really care. The second question I'm going to ask you is, who here has been born after 1958? Again, anybody born after 1950? Oh my God, a lot of us. After 1958? Okay, most of us. Good. And so last question, which I want you to rather think about and answer here, and I think it's a question that you might have brought with you here as you were coming for this talk, is how would your current life look like if you were to live till 100? What would change in your current life right now, as you are, if you were to live till 100? And just think about it, whether it would be a difference between the way you speak to other people, whether you would get married or not, whether you would change your job. So just kind of think about it as we're going through this talk. Think about what would happen if you were to live till 150. So we're going to start and crack on with talking a little bit more about death and about aging. It is something that we're aware of. It has happened to pretty much anybody that we know of. There hasn't been a single person that has lived on this planet that managed to not die, apart from all of us that are still living. And we seem to look at it as if it was sort of an impossible task that has to happen to us. But we failed to realize that so was flying before actually first time the Wright brothers built a plane about 100 years ago and they took off. So as we kind of discover aging and we think about death as such, we start to realize that it's much more of a task, a very difficult task, but something that we can revert or we can fight against. There are already scientists who managed to reverse aging in small mice. There are animals on this planet already that live immortally, like some of the medusas. So we know it is possible, and the problem that we are struggling with is that human organisms are simply a lot more difficult, are a lot more complicated. So that's the problem we're struggling here with. So bearing that in mind, let's get straight into the point of the 3 little tips that I will have for you today that I want you to take with you away about what you can do in your life to live up until 100. And it may look a little bit ridiculous, it may look a little bit strange, it may look like I'm taking the piss, but these are genuinely good tips. Okay, I'm sorry there's only one tip going on over here, but I tried to accumulate as many people as I could to this talk. And we're going to go through what I'm about to say and try to understand why these are actually good tips. Okay? So I want you to think about how would it feel like to stand where this little guy over here is standing. What would be the feeling you would be having right now? So you can think that, okay, we're standing in front of a really big change or a really big progress, but the problem is that we never really see what's ahead of us. We see only where we are right now. So the true answer to this question, how would it feel to stand where he's standing, is that it would feel like this. You know where we are right now, you know where we are at the moment, you know our past, and you kind of know we're going to a certain direction and we're improving, things are improving in life, but you don't really realize what's ahead of you. And I think what's interesting here, and the information I want to share with you today, is that there are a lot of really clever people on this planet that all agree that we are in fact standing in this situation. It's just not all of us are quite able to see it. And that big change that is upcoming, that is upon us, is something called superintelligence. Okay, so it's a term that maybe some of you guys have heard about. Quite generally, we can speak about it as artificial intelligence. Superintelligence would be another term that I'd be using throughout this talk, or you can also refer to it as artificial superintelligence, or in short, ASI. So to be able to understand what superintelligence is, I want to bring a little quote from a guy called Nick Bostrom. And the quote reads, "By a superintelligence, we mean an intellect that is much smarter than the best human brains in practically every field, including scientific creativity, general wisdom, and social skills." Okay? That's what we're going to be referring to as the superintelligence. What I want you to keep in mind, though, is that we're not talking about sci-fi, okay? This isn't a sci-fi novel, I'm telling you. This isn't about, in a million years. And I know we have this very strong feeling of artificial intelligence looking more or less like this. And for the purpose of this talk, I would like you to forget about this, okay? This is based on real forecasts, based on real data made by real analysts and real scientists, real thinkers, and they really predict that. So do not think of anything I'm about to say in terms of crazy AI that is going to destroy us all, okay? So to start talking about superintelligence, let's kick off with mentioning something called the Moore's law, which I suppose those technical of you here may have heard of. It's a law made by a guy called George Moore about 40 years ago, which states that every 2 years, the processing power of computers doubles. And there's a variation of that statement which says that also every 2 years, their size shrinks by 2, so they halve. And what we've observed that within those last 40 years, it actually has been true. The computers have become more and more powerful, and it's an exponential curve. Every 2 years, they are twice as powerful. And I think it's very easy to see here that if this will progress, the processing power of the computers that we'll have in our pockets and in our desks are going to surpass the processing power of our own brains. I know it's something that not may be easy to think of, putting away the sci-fi side of it. But like I mentioned before, a lot of people on this planet agree that this will eventually happen. And what will come with it, as we surpass the capacities of our own brains, is that these entities, these computers, will be able to think a lot more powerfully than we are. There will be a lot bigger power will be available to them. And this power will bring certain consequences. But kind of to be able to understand superintelligence better, let's kind of look at intelligence as such and how we perceive it as humans altogether. So we as humans always seem to think about it this way, that we are really, really high. We're clever. There are better of us, there are worse of us, but we're sort of in the range of the clever creatures. And there's a huge gap between us and the monkeys, and then there's another huge gap between them and the chickens, and there are ants, and then somewhere there are plants, which we all believe that have no brains at all. But what we fail to sometimes see is that we are just a little bit more intelligent than monkeys are, for instance. That there isn't that much of a difference, in fact, when you look at the grand scheme of things. If you were to imagine, if we made a clone of this little guy over here and put him only 4 steps up on this intelligence staircase, just around where the orange color is, that clone would have been as intelligent to us as we are right now to chickens. Okay? So there's only a small deviation in intelligence that can produce an enormous change of perception. So how does that compare to superintelligence is something we can't really express well. This is a very basic graph that just is meant to give you an idea of what the situation is right now, but it's by no means it's accurate. It will be so much more intelligent, we can't really comprehend it, we can't perceive it. We try to kind of figure out, it will be super intelligent, like I have IQ 180, the super AI will have 2 million, but it's a very random number we just come up with just to have something to grasp on. So what we really need to figure out here is, or understand rather, is that it will be unimaginably more powerful than we are. And I think to also understand that power a little better and the consequences it will bring, I want to bring another quote here for you, which reads, "There are no hard problems, only problems that are hard to a certain level of intelligence." Okay, and I want you to think about it for a minute. I want that to sink in for a little while. There are no hard problems, okay? only problems that are hard to a certain level of intelligence. Move the smallest bit upwards in the level of intelligence, and some problems will shift from impossible to obvious. Move a substantial degree upwards, and all of them will become obvious. Okay? So when we look back at this graph, what we can see is that we kind of have an idea that it will be a lot more powerful, but it is just a graph, and it's a very vague way to explaining it. So I always like to bring this small metaphor to make our brains understand a little bit better what kind of a difference we're really talking about here. So if you look at the difference between us and ants, I always like to bring this analogy of trying to explain a simple task to an ant. Okay? Imagine picking up a chair, right, and putting it somewhere else. I don't have to think about what I'm doing. It's a simple task. My brain did it without any thinking. If you try to explain that same action to an ant, there is no way it could even start thinking about it. You couldn't consider picking up a chair and putting it somewhere else. It knows that chairs exist. It doesn't have a name for it. It doesn't know its purpose. It only just knows it's there. But to be able to think about moving something so large into another place for an ant is impossible. To me and everybody here, it's a simple task. We don't think about these things. So through this analogy, I want you to understand that we are an ant, or less of an ant, when compared with superintelligence. Okay? We're something that can barely understand it. Our attempts to understand superintelligence are as futile as ants' attempts to understand our life and our actions. And what this brings is that superintelligence is something we really do not know much about. And we are really going to be failing in trying to predict what the outcomes will be. Okay? Amongst all the people that participate in those conferences, by which year would you reckon, realistically, optimistically, and pessimistically, that the superintelligence is going to arrive? And they asked about 2,500 people around these conferences. So the results from this survey were as follows. Optimistically, a median optimistic year pointed by these really clever people was 2022, which is 4 years from now. And we all kind of sit here and we think, okay, that's probably not going to happen, right? We're really close to that. We can definitely tell that this is not going to happen. But these people said, well, if things go really well, we would like it to happen. It would be 2022. But realistically, they said that by 2040, which is 22 years from now, this will happen. Superintelligence will be reality. They say that by 2040, it is more likely that superintelligence will exist than that it wouldn't. And finally, they say that if things go really bad and we take really lots of time to do it, there is a lot of problems on the way, that it will happen by 2075, which isn't that much of a good news for us, but it's really good news to our children, which is great anyway for human race. There was also a separate survey where they asked a much more direct question, and they asked, by which year would you reckon that superintelligence is going to be achieved? And 42% of people, they said by 2030, so 10 years earlier than the previous one. 25% said by 2050. So if you just look at these two numbers, that's 67% of these really clever people that said it's probably going to happen within the next 50 years. Interestingly enough, 2% of people said that will never happen, which kind of puts you at a different perspective to it as well. So another important thing to understand about artificial intelligence and the progress and everything I'm talking about here is that it's not really based on anybody's opinion. You may think, oh, I wouldn't like it to happen because it's definitely going to be bad, or I would really like it to happen because it's going to be really good. The problem with this whole topic is that there's a ton of people all around the world trying to achieve it. Governments, there are big companies like Google, IBM, as you probably might have heard already. There are developers like myself, that's actually me, working away in London. As you can probably figure out, I'm really interested in artificial intelligence. Or it could be a hacker sitting somewhere in his cave in a den, somewhere in the middle of a desert in Iran. All he needs is a computer and access to internet and some programming skills and time. So it's not like we can start making regulations about it. Okay? This will certainly happen. It's just we don't really know when. So if we think about all that I said, and we go back to the first slide where I suggested 3 ways in which you could survive to live till 100. The point I'm trying to say here is that these aren't actually bad tips. When you really think about it, and if you look at where we are as civilization, we are actually standing where this guy is standing. We may not know how close that line is, but if it happens, it will change the humanity, it will change the way this world looks like, the way we interact with each other, it will change pretty much everything. And if you recall back the question I asked at the beginning of who here was born after 1958, I then go to something called life expectancy calculator, which is a website you can go to, you can tell them your age, and they're going to tell you how long you're going to live. And for myself, it turned out to be 82 years. So if we think about 1958 and the 2040 that we just learned, which is most probably a time by which superintelligence is going to be, we find out that 2040 is only 82 years from 1958. Which means if you had your hand up at the beginning of this talk, everything that I said before is going to happen during your lifetime. But you have only one task. Only one thing you have to do to be able to experience it. You have to survive. So love yourself and take care of yourself and think about yourself. And most importantly, don't die. Because if you die in the meantime, it doesn't matter that all this will happen. It doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong or if it's good or bad. You'll be the last person to pass away before it actually happens. So let's say you think it's still a cool talk and you think it's interesting information, but you weren't quite convinced. Maybe I got your curiosity, but you're still not quite convinced about it. And I understand it because it's quite a bit of a strange subject. It's not like I'm going to tell you about funneling in marketing, right? Or I'm going to tell you about politics. This is something very abstract and something we find very difficult to think about. And by no means 20 minutes is enough to get every single one of you guys here interested about it, or believe me, by no means. In which case, I really, really, really recommend you to read about it, okay? There's an article written on a website called Wait by Why. The article name is Artificial Intelligence Revolution. And I highly recommend it. I don't know if some of you already know of this article or know of the website. It's actually a guy who does a really, really thorough research onto a particular subject and then summarizes it for you in a fairly lengthy but very approachable manner. And it's very easy to read. And he covers a ton more stuff than I have covered today, and my talk actually is based on that article. Some of the images were actually taken from it. So what I really recommend for everybody to take from this talk is to go and check it out. I'm going to share a link in the events page as soon as I go home, which may be late, maybe not late today, but as soon as I can, I'll try to share this information with you on the events page. And if you are still not convinced by what I'm saying right now, I'm going to bring a couple of quotes for you. This is what my friend said about this article on Facebook, and this is how I found out about it. He made a post in which he linked this article, and he said, out of all the posts I ever published, if there was one thing I could have you read, it would be this article. This is the most important thing you'll ever read in your life. And I went ahead and I read it, and I agree with him. This is the most important thing I ever read in my life. Then the second quote is coming from my beautiful girlfriend, who I recommended this article to. And she said, I thought it would be difficult, but it isn't. You don't need to be really smart to understand it. Which I think says a lot about the quality of it. And the third quote comes from the CEO of eBay, who said, not about this article, but who said nonetheless, if you choose to ignore AI now, don't expect to be in the business in 5 years' time. Yeah. So conclusion is, go and read it. Okay? Finally, you may think, okay, that's a cool talk, that's fair enough, Voy, but then it doesn't apply to me. Like, you're a software developer. I'm a mathematician, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor. Like, how can I even relate? Like, this is something that doesn't apply to me. How can I even have something to say about this? And I want you to understand is that you have something to say about this. This isn't about only programmers sitting in their caves. This is a lot about ethics. This is a lot about discussing these things. The other day I was in Vegeta a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and randomly a guy who I never met before started talking to me about AI because he could hear us over there. So this is something that people are starting to talk about, and with time it's going to become more and more important that we understand it. Okay? So lastly, if you feel like continuing this discussion, this is my Facebook. My name is Voy, like I mentioned at the beginning. Feel free to find me up and add me and hit me with a conversation if you're interested. As you can tell, I'm really excited about this whole topic, and I'm really optimistic about what AI can bring and sharing this information, discussing with others. So feel free to get in touch. And before we go to the Q&A section, I just want to leave you with just one last quote, which comes from that exact article that I just mentioned. And it reads, "AI is the last invention we'll ever make, the last challenge we'll ever face." Thank you very much.